Sarah Vance was running, but not out of fear. Each of her steps on the aegis of order sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. Behind her, the heavy, rhythmic thuds of High Executor Malachur's guards echoed through the obsidian corridors. The 2.5G gravity, designed to pin intruders to the floor, was now her greatest ally. The Xylanthian reinforcements, even in their light exoskeletons, were struggling to keep up. They were delicate creatures of the garden, while Sarah was a daughter of the grave. To her, the increased weight felt like a warm embrace of Earth itself. In her left hand, she gripped the stolen data core. It was cold, vibrating with the weight of 1,000,000 stolen lives. It wasn't just data. It was a confession. It contained the raw, unfiltered memories of every soldier the hegemony had harvested from death worlds across the galaxy. "Sarah, you must hurry," Kai's voice resonated in her mind, though it was growing faint. The Starseeker was pulling away, drawing the fire of the Enforcer fleet to give her time. "The flagship is locking down the intelligence deck. They are going to vent the atmosphere to stop you." "Let them," Sarah grunted, skidding around a corner and leaving deep gouges in the floor. "I've held my breath in the Nevada dust for longer than they can imagine." She wasn't looking for the exit. She was looking for the nexus, the central neural broadcast hub. The hegemony controlled the hollowed iron guards through a constant stream of low-frequency neural suppression. It kept their memories buried and their wills broken. If she could reach the hub and upload the data core, she wouldn't just be showing the truth to the galaxy. She would be screaming it into the minds of the monsters chasing her. She found the access hatch to the maintenance spine. It was a narrow vertical shaft, barely wide enough for a Xylanthian, let alone a dense human woman. Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the edges of the hatch and pulled. The unbreakable seal snapped like a dry twig. She jammed herself into the shaft, using her powerful legs to propel herself upward against the crushing gravity. Inside the spine, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and synthetic oil. Purple cables, thick as human thighs, pulsed with the ship's lifeblood. This was the nervous system of the Aegis of Order. Sarah reached the primary terminal, a glowing circular dais surrounded by holographic emitters. 2 Xylanthian technicians were there, their 4 hands moving in a blur as they tried to shut down the sector. "Step away," Sarah commanded. The technicians didn't even try to fight. They looked at the woman who had literally torn her way into the heart of their ship, covered in the oil and blood of their invincible guards, and they simply fled, their spindly legs clicking frantically on the metal. Sarah slammed the data core into the primary port. "Okay, Kai, if you can hear me. Help me bypass the encryption." "I am here," Kai's thought arrived, sharp and clear. "I am linking the Starseeker's processors to your terminal." But Sarah, once the broadcast starts, there is no going back. The hollowed will remember everything. The pain, the loss, the anger. It will be a psychic tidal wave. "Good," Sarah said, her finger hovering over the execute command. The hegemony wanted to build an army of ghosts. It's time they saw what happens when the ghosts wake up. She pressed the command. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the entire ship shuddered. The purple cables around Sarah flared into a blinding, violent violet. A low-frequency hum vibrated through the bulkheads, a sound so deep it could be felt in the marrow of her bones. Down in the hangar across the barracks, and in the very corridors where the iron guards were closing in on her position, the broadcast hit. One of the guards, a massive, 4-armed reptilian from a world of tectonic fire, froze. His glowing purple visor flickered. Inside his mind, the walls of the hegemony's suppression crumbled. He didn't see the obsidian hallways of the flagship anymore. He saw his home. He saw the face of his mate. He remembered the scream he let out when the Xylanthian mercy ships descended to burn his village. He clutched his helmet, a guttural, agonizing roar tearing from his throat. Across the ship, hundreds of iron guards were experiencing the same thing. The hollowed were being filled. They were remembering names, languages, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Sarah stepped out of the maintenance spine and back into the main corridor. She was met not by a volley of plasma fire, but by a scene of absolute chaos. 3 iron guards were on their knees, their armor sparking. One was smashing his own head against the wall, trying to stop the influx of memories. Another had turned his weapon on the Xylanthian officers who had been commanding him seconds before. A tall, muscular guard, humanoid but with skin like obsidian and white pupilless eyes, looked up as Sarah approached. He was from a Category 8 death world called Ignis. He looked at Sarah, his hands shaking. I had a daughter," the guard whispered in a language that shouldn't have existed in the hegemony's records. Sarah stopped, her expression softening for the first time. "I know. They took everything from you. But they couldn't kill who you are." The guard stood up. He was a head taller than Sarah, encased in a suit of armor that could withstand a tank shell. He looked at the data core still glowing in the terminal. "They told us we were monsters," the guard said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "They told us the garden was our only hope." "They lied," Sarah said, stepping beside him. "You're not monsters. You're survivors. And right now, the people who did this to you are sitting on the bridge, waiting for the pruning to continue." The guard looked down the hallway toward the command deck. He raised his heavy plasma rifle, but instead of the standard violet light, it hummed with a rebellious, flickering blue. "My name is Jax," the guard said. "I'm Sarah," she replied. "Sarah of Earth," Jax said, a grim, predatory smile touching his lips. "Lead us. Let us show the garden what the harvest really looks like." More guards began to join them. A massive, ursine creature with cybernetic eyes. A lithe, feline warrior with blades grafted to her forearms. They were the unbalanced ones, the ones from the worlds of extreme heat, crushing gravity, and endless predators. Together, they were a nightmare made of flesh and iron. They began to move as a unit. They didn't move with the slow, calculated grace of the Xylanthians. They moved with the frantic, explosive energy of a death world. They tore through the ship's internal defenses like a hot knife through wax. Automated turrets were ripped from the ceilings. Security drones were crushed underfoot. Sarah led the way. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was a storm. She used her earthborn density to shield the smaller rebels, taking hits that would have vaporized a Xylanthian and turning them into mere bruises. They reached the secondary elevator bank. Suddenly, the gravity shifted again. 4.0 G. 5.0 G. Malachar was trying to use the inhibitors again. The newly awakened guards groaned, their bodies straining under the sudden weight. But this time they weren't alone. "Lean into it," Sarah shouted, her voice cutting through the hum of the gravity generators. "Remember where you came from. This weight is nothing compared to the weight of the lies they told you." Jax roared, his obsidian muscles bulging. He forced himself to take a step, then another. The awakened guards, inspired by the small human woman who stood as straight as a spear in the crushing field, began to push back. They were the children of the heavy worlds. Gravity was their birthright. They reached the doors to the officer's deck. Sarah didn't wait for Jax to use his rifle. She stepped forward, gripped the edge of the blast door, and with a scream of pure, unadulterated earthborn fury, she tore the door off its hinges and threw it down the hallway. The Xylanthian officers inside screamed. They weren't soldiers. They were bureaucrats of death. They looked at the army of monsters, led by a Ruiva woman with a gaze of cold iron, and they knew the garden was burning. Sarah looked at the central viewport. In the distance, she could see the Starseeker, its hull scorched but its engines still glowing. Beyond it, the fleet of Enforcer ships was in disarray as the rebellion spread through the neural links. "Jax, take the armory," Sarah commanded. "Free everyone in the tanks. I'm going to the bridge. I have a date with an executor." Jax nodded, his white eyes glowing. "For the fallen, Sarah." "For the living," she corrected. As the rebels branched off to take control of the ship's vital systems, Sarah Vance turned toward the final lift. She felt the data core in her pocket. She felt the weight of the 5.0 G field. And for the first time since she was kidnapped from the Nevada desert, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The hegemony had wanted a specimen. They had wanted to study the fragile giant, to learn how to break a world. Instead, they had brought the spark to the tinder. Sarah stepped into the lift. "Bridge," she said to the voice-activated system. "Voice recognition required." The ship's computer chimed. Sarah punched the control panel, her fist going through the polymer and into the circuitry. "The voice of Earth," she growled. The lift began to rise. The neural rebellion had begun. And as the aegis of order began to tilt under the internal war, the galaxy started to wake up. The garden was a lie. The grave was a cradle. And Sarah Vance was the hand that was going to rock it until the Empire fell. The lift doors hissed open, but they didn't slide. They groaned, the high-quality polymers warping as the 5.0 g gravity field inside the high bridge tried to crush them into the deck. Sarah Vance stepped out. Each footfall was no longer a thud. It was a rhythmic explosion that echoed through the vast, silent hall. The bridge of the Aegis of Order was not a place of science or exploration. It was a cathedral of power. The floor was made of polished obsidian glass, so dark and reflective it felt like walking on the surface of a frozen black sea. Above, the dome was transparent, revealing the chaos of the battle outside, the flickering lights of dying ships and the violet beams of the Enforcer fleet. In the center of this black sea sat High Executor Malachar. He didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply watched her, his nebular eyes swirling with a mixture of pity and cold calculation. Around him, the air shimmered. The gravity here was so intense it was bending the light itself. "You are persistent, Dr. Vance," Malachar's voice boomed, vibrating through the very bones of her skull. "But persistence is not a substitute for logic. You have brought fire into a house of glass. Did you really think you could burn it all down without losing everything you love?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was focusing on breathing. At 5 times Earth's gravity, her chest felt like it was being squeezed by a hydraulic press. Her earth-born heart was hammering, pushing blood that felt as heavy as mercury through her veins. But she was a daughter of the grave. She looked Malachar in the eye and took a step forward. The obsidian floor shattered under her boot, a spiderweb of white light racing across the black surface. "I'm done talking about logic, Malachar," Sarah rasped, her voice thick with the strain. "I've seen your garden. I've seen the Hollowed. You aren't protectors. You're just cowards who are afraid of anything you can't control." Malachar stood up. He was a mountain of gold and parchment skin. With a flick of his finger, a massive holographic display flared to life between them. "Let us talk about control then," the executor said. The display split. On the left, Sarah saw Earth. It was beautiful, a marble of sapphire and clouds. On the right, she saw a cluster of 12 other planets, the worlds of Jax, Kai, and the thousands of other prisoners she had just awakened. "This is the binary protocol," Malachar explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "The Aegis of Order is the neural linchpin for the entire sector. When I died, or if this bridge is compromised, a signal is sent. It is a failsafe. A dead man's switch." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "What kind of signal?" "The reset you found in the data," Malachar said, pointing to the 12 planets on the right. "If you continue this rebellion, if you destroy me or take this ship, the satellites in those 12 systems will trigger. They will induce solar flares that will burn the atmospheres of those worlds. Billions will die. The harvest will be lost, but the garden will be safe from their chaos." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the bridge. "And Earth?" Malachar stepped closer, the gravity increasing to 6.0 g. Sarah's knees buckled for a fraction of a second before she locked them, her muscles screaming in protest. "Earth is special," Malachar whispered. "If you surrender now, if you allow the neural suppression to be re-established and return to your cell, I will cancel the reset for the 12 worlds. And I will delay the pruning of Earth for another 1,000 years. Your people will live. They will dream. They will remain in their cradle, safe and ignorant. This is the only mercy the hegemony offers. Sarah looked at the display. The timer was counting down in alien glyphs. 10 minutes. She could save Earth. She could give her world another millennium of peace, of life, of sunrise and sunset. All she had to do was give up. All she had to do was let the hegemony turn her back into a specimen. But then she looked at the other side of the screen. She saw the worlds of the people who were currently fighting beside her. She saw the home of Jax, the man who had just remembered his daughter. She saw the home of Kai, the philosopher who had helped her find the truth. If she saved Earth, she was murdering 12 other worlds. She was becoming the very thing she hated, a curator of death, choosing who lived and who died based on a cold, selfish logic. "You're asking me to play God," Sarah said, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "I am asking you to be a leader," Malachar corrected. "A leader protects her own. Is that not the core of your humanity? To survive at all costs?" Kai's voice whispered in her mind. It was weak, distorted by the gravity field. "Do not listen. He is using your love against you. The hegemony does not understand sacrifice. They only understand debt." Sarah looked at her hands. They were covered in the dust of the Nevada desert, the oil of the Starseeker, and the blood of the rebellion. She remembered the feeling of the 1G on Earth, the way the wind felt on her face, the smell of rain on hot pavement. She loved her world. She loved it more than anything. But Earth wasn't just a planet. Humanity wasn't just a species. To be human was to stand up for those who couldn't stand. It was to be the Deathworlder, who stood in the gap between the predator and the prey. If she betrayed the 12 worlds to save Earth, she wasn't saving humanity. She was killing the very thing that made them human. "You're right about one thing, Malachar," Sarah said. She stood up straighter, her spine popping as she fought against the 6.0G field. "Humans do survive at all costs. But there's something you don't understand about us." Malachar tilted his head, his nebula eyes swirling. "And what is that?" "We don't like being told what the costs are," Sarah growled. She didn't lunge at Malachar. Instead, she slammed her fist into the black glass floor. She didn't just hit it. She channeled every ounce of her earthborn mass, every bit of the 6.0G pressure, into a single point of impact. On Earth she might have broken a bone. Here, in the hyperdense environment of the bridge, she became a kinetic hammer. The shockwave didn't just crack the floor. It shattered the structural integrity of the bridge's gravity plating. The 6.0G field flickered, then spiked to 10.0G for a microsecond before the entire system short-circuited. The sudden release of pressure was like an explosion. The black glass floor disintegrated into millions of shards that flew upward like a reverse rainstorm. Malachar was caught off guard. His golden armor sparking as the sudden shift in gravity sent him stumbling. Sarah didn't wait. She used the momentary weightlessness to launch herself. She didn't move like a person anymore. She moved like a projectile. She slammed into Malachar, her shoulder connecting with his chest with the force of a car crash. They tumbled across the bridge, crashing through holographic displays and floating consoles. "You fool!" Malachar roared, grabbing Sarah by the throat. Even with his systems failing, he was massive and powerful. "You have triggered the signal. The 12 worlds are burning because of your pride." Sarah grabbed his wrists, her fingers digging into the gold alloy of his gauntlets. "Not yet." She screamed in her mind. On the deck below, Jax and the newly awakened Iron Guards reached the primary transmitter array. They weren't using codes. They were using heavy plasma cutters and their own raw strength. "For the daughter I remembered," Jax roared, swinging a massive metal beam into the heart of the transmitter. On the bridge, the holographic display of the 12 worlds flickered. The reset signal, denied its primary broadcast path, began to feed back into the ship's own systems. The Aegis of Order shuddered. A deep metallic groan vibrated through the hull, the sound of a ship dying from the inside out. Malachar looked at the displays, his nebula eyes filling with something Sarah had never seen in him before. Fear. Not fear of death, but fear of the unknown. The garden was failing. The logic was broken. The signal, Malachar whispered. It is meant to be absolute. Nothing is absolute, Sarah panted, her grip on his throat tightening. Especially not when you're dealing with people who have nothing left to lose. Outside the viewport, the red grid around the 12 worlds faded. The solar flares were never triggered. The satellites, deprived of their command signal, drifted into dead orbits. But the timer for Earth was still active. The Earth protocol is hard-coded, Malachar hissed, a desperate smirk returning to his face. It does not need the transmitter. It is a timed event. In 5 minutes, your world dies, Sarah Vance. And you have destroyed the only console that could stop it. Sarah looked at the wreckage of the bridge. The primary command seat was gone. The holographic interface was a cloud of static. She looked at the data core in her pocket, the one containing the memories of 1,000,000 lives. Kai, Sarah thought. Can you hear me? I'm here, Sarah. But the ship's neural net is collapsing. I cannot reach the Earth satellites from here. I don't need you to reach them, Sarah said, looking at the massive biocomputer core in the center of the bridge, the brain of the ship. I need you to open a door. Sarah, what are you doing? The hegemony uses a neural link to control the guards, Sarah said, stepping toward the glowing, pulsating brain core. That link is two-way. If I plug this data core directly into the ship's primary consciousness, if I flood the network with the memories of 1,000,000 Deathworlders all at once, the psychic backlash would be catastrophic, Kai warned. The ship's AI will scream. The satellites, which are part of the same neural network, will be overloaded. But Sarah, you are the interface. You are the only one dense enough to survive the connection. And even then, it might burn your mind to ash. Sarah looked at the image of Earth. It was still there, quiet, beautiful, unaware that its life was being measured in seconds. She thought about the Nevada desert. She thought about the coffee that smelled like laundry detergent. She thought about the fact that she was just a scientist who wanted to study migration patterns. I'm a Deathworlder, Kai, Sarah said, a sad but firm smile on her face. We're built for the heat. She grabbed the neural interface cables, thick, glowing violet tendrils that looked like the roots of an ancient tree. She didn't hesitate. She jammed the data core into the primary socket and grabbed the cables with both hands. No! Malachar screamed, lunging for her. But it was too late. The connection was made. Sarah Vance didn't see the bridge anymore. She didn't feel the gravity or the pain. Suddenly she was everyone. She was the four-armed warrior who had lost his home. She was the feline hunter who had been turned into a machine. She was 1,000,000 screams, 1,000,000 tears, 1,000,000 moments of joy and terror. She was the raw, unedited history of 1,000 death worlds. She took that mountain of grief and rage, and she didn't hold it back. She channeled it. She turned herself into a lens, focusing all that human and alien emotion into a single psychic spear. Wake up! She screamed, not with her voice but with her soul. Across the sector, every hegemony satellite, every enforcer ship, and every monitoring station felt the shockwave. It wasn't code. It wasn't logic. It was a tidal wave of pure, unfiltered life. The reset satellites around Earth didn't just stop. They short-circuited. Their processors, unable to handle the sudden influx of complex emotional data, literally melted. The red grid around Seoul, 3 flickered once, twice, and then vanished. The cage was gone. On the bridge, Sarah Vance fell to her knees. The violet cables turned black and withered. The biocomputer core hummed a final, mournful note and went dark. Silence descended on the aegis of order. Sarah lay on the shattered obsidian floor, her breath coming in slow, ragged hitches. Her eyes were open, but they were no longer looking at the bridge. They were looking at something far away. Malachar stood over her, his golden armor dull and cracked. He looked at the viewport. Earth was safe. 12 worlds were safe. The garden was in ruins. You destroyed it all, Malachar whispered, his voice trembling. For a world that doesn't even know you exist. Sarah turned her head slowly, looking at the High Executor. A small, bloody smile touched her lips. "That's the thing about humans, Malachur," she whispered. "We don't do it for the thanks. We do it because it's the right thing to do. And because we really, really hate being told what to do." Outside, the Starseeker pulled alongside the flagship. Kai and Jax were already preparing the boarding parties. The rebellion wasn't over. In fact, it had just become a galactic war. But as Sarah Vance closed her eyes for a moment of much-needed rest, she knew one thing for certain. The fragile giant had broken the jar. And now, the rest of the universe was going to have to learn how to live with the pieces. The harvest was over. The heirs of the Death World were finally coming home. The first thing Sarah Vance felt was the weight. Not the artificial, crushing weight of the hegemony's gravity inhibitors, but the natural, comforting, and relentless pull of Earth. She was still thousands of miles above the atmosphere, tucked away in the medical bay of the Starseeker, but she could feel it in her marrow. She was home, or at least she was on the doorstep. When she opened her eyes, the world was a blur of soft teal light and the rhythmic humming of Krellian technology. Her head throbbed with a dull, echoing ache, a lingering gift from the psychic scream she had unleashed through the aegis of order. "Do not try to move too quickly," a voice resonated in her mind. 'Twas Kai. Sarah ignored the advice. She sat up, her earthborn muscles protesting for only a split second before they locked into place. She swung her legs over the side of the medical pod, her feet hitting the floor with a solid, heavy thud that felt like a declaration of existence. "How long was I out?" Sarah rasped. Her voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "3 cycles," Kai replied, stepping out of the shadows. He looked weary. His golden skin was duller than usual, and his eyes showed the strain of maintaining a rebellion while protecting a comatose human. The psychic backlash was significant. "You didn't just overload a ship, Sarah. You sent a ripple through the entire neural network of the hegemony. They are in chaos, but that chaos is turning into a very specific kind of rage." Sarah walked to the viewport. There it was, Earth. From this distance, it looked so peaceful, so unaware of the cosmic dagger that had been held at its throat for 10,000 years. But as she squinted, she saw something new. Tiny flickers of light were rising from the night side of the planet. "They noticed," Sarah whispered. "They would have to be blind not to," Kai said. The destruction of the Aegis of Order created a flare in the Oort cloud that was visible to every telescope on your world. And then there was your broadcast. You didn't just wake up the hollowed, Sarah. You shouted at your own world. Sarah remembered the moment, the feeling of being everyone at once, the desperate need to scream, "Wake up," to the universe. She hadn't realized her own world had been on the receiving end of that psychic pulse. "What are they doing?" she asked. "They are doing what Deathworlders do," a new voice boomed. Jax stepped into the room. The obsidian-skinned warrior looked different. He had stripped away the black biological armor of the enforcers, wearing instead a simple set of gray fatigues that looked comically small on his massive frame. He carried a heavy plasma rifle slung over his shoulder, but he held it with the ease of a man who no longer needed it to feel powerful. "They are arming themselves," Jax said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Your people." They didn't hide. When the satellites in the Oort cloud began to fail and the cage flickered out, they didn't wait for an invitation. "Our sensors are picking up thousands of launches. They are taking every rocket, every shuttle, and every piece of scrap metal they can find, and they are bringing it into orbit. They're going to get themselves killed," Sarah said, her heart sinking. "They don't have the tech. They don't know how to fight a hegemony purge fleet." "Then you had better tell them," Kai suggested. "The Starseeker has established a secure link with the planet's primary communication hubs. The United Nations, the various space agencies. They are all screaming for answers. They think we are an invasion." Sarah took a deep breath. She looked at her hands, scarred, dirty, but steady. She wasn't just Dr. Sarah Vance anymore. She was the one who had seen the truth. She was the one who had broken the jar. Take me to the bridge, she said. The bridge of the Starseeker was no longer the quiet, sterile place it had been when Sarah was first kidnapped. It was a hive of activity. Freed prisoners of a dozen different species were manning the consoles, working alongside Jax's newly awakened rebel guards. The air smelled of sweat, ozone, and determination. Establishing link, Kai announced, his fingers dancing over a holographic interface. Sarah, you are going to be broadcast on every screen, every radio, and every smartphone on Earth. This is the first contact protocol. But there is no script for this. The massive central screen flickered. For a moment it was static. Then it split into hundreds of small windows. Sarah saw faces, thousands of them. She saw a boardroom in Geneva. She saw a military bunker in Nebraska. She saw people standing in Times Square, looking up at the giant screens with expressions of pure, unadulterated terror and awe. Sarah stepped into the center of the bridge. She made sure she stood in the light. She wanted them to see her, not as a goddess or an alien, but as a human who had been through hell and come back with the keys to the kingdom. My name is Dr. Sarah Vance, she began. Her voice was steady, broadcast through the ship's powerful transmitters and translated by every AI on Earth. 6 days ago, I was taken from the Nevada desert by an empire that has kept our world in a cage for 10,000 years. They call us Deathworlders. They were afraid of us. They were afraid of what we would do if we ever reached the stars. A hush fell over the screens. In the UN Assembly Hall, ambassadors stood frozen. The battle you saw in the sky. That was the beginning of the end of that cage, Sarah continued. I am standing on a ship of rebels. Aliens from worlds just like ours, who were also pruned, harvested, and broken by the galactic hegemony. We have stopped the immediate threat to Earth. The satellites meant to burn our atmosphere have been disabled. A cheer began to rise from the screens, but Sarah raised her hand, her expression turning somber. But it's not over, she warned. The hegemony is not a garden. It is an empire. And they do not tolerate weeds. As I speak, a purge fleet is entering our solar system. Thousands of ships, led by Grand Admiral Zale, a man who believes our existence is a mistake that must be corrected. On one of the screens, a high-ranking general leaned forward. Dr. Vance, this is General Miller of the Joint Chiefs. We've seen the launches. We're moving everything we have into high orbit. But you're saying it won't be enough. General, your missiles won't even scratch their shields, Sarah said bluntly. Your shuttles are like paper to them. If you go out there with what you have now, you're just providing them with target practice. Then what do we do? A woman's voice asked. The President of the United States, her face pale but her eyes sharp. If the choice is between fighting and dying, we'll fight. Sarah felt a surge of pride. That was the Earth she knew. That was the Death World spirit. We don't just fight, Sarah said. Nos improvisamos. We adapt. We have the wreckage of the Aegis of Order in the Oort cloud. We have the technology of the Starseeker and the other ships that have joined our rebellion. And most importantly, we have the hollowed tech that the hegemony left behind when their neural links snapped. She looked at Kai. Kai, upload the schematics for the kinetic shunt and the atmospheric hardening protocols to every engineering server on Earth. Now. It is done, Kai confirmed. In those files, Sarah told the world, is the secret to turning your rockets into kinetic slugs that can bypass their energy shields. It shows you how to reinforce your hulls with the very energy they use to contain us. You have 48 hours before the fleet reaches Saturn. You need to take every piece of industrial equipment, every shipyard, and every factory, and you need to start building. Not ships. Weapons. Dr. Vance, the president said. Why are you doing this? You've seen what's out there. Why not just take that ship and run? Save yourself. Sarah looked at the blue marble behind her. She thought about the millions of years of struggle it took to create a species that could survive on a planet that tried to kill it every day. She thought about the beauty of a desert sunrise and the smell of the ocean. Because Earth is the only world I've got, Sarah said. And because the galaxy needs to learn that if you try to prune a human, you're going to get cut. The transmission ended. The bridge of the Starseeker was silent for a heartbeat. "They are moving," Jack said, checking his tactical display. "The planet. It's like an ant nest that's been kicked. Industrial output is spiking across every continent. They are stripping the skin off their cities to build armor." "It won't be enough on its own," Kai said, his golden eyes flickering with data. "The Purge fleet is massive. They are bringing sun crushers, ships designed to destabilize a star. If they get past Jupiter, they won't even need to fight us. They can just turn Sol into a supernova." Sarah turned toward the command chair. She didn't sit in it. She stood before it, looking at the tactical map. "Then we don't let them pass Jupiter." "Jax, how many awakened guards do we have?" 12,000, Jax replied. "And more are waking up every hour as the psychic ripple spreads to the outer outposts. And the other prisoners. They want blood, Sarah," Kai said. "They've spent their lives in jars. They don't want to go back. They will follow you into the sun if you ask them." "I'm not going to ask them to die for Earth," Sarah said. "I'm going to ask them to fight for the right to exist. Kai, take us to the wreckage of the Aegis of Order. We need to salvage the main cannon. If we can strap that to a human heavy-lift rocket, we'll have a fighting chance." As the Starseeker turned, its engines glowing with a fierce, rebellious blue, Sarah Vance felt the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. She was no longer just a scientist. She was the general of a ragtag army of monsters and primitives. 2 days later, the Hegemony fleet arrived. Grand Admiral Zale stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Light of Reason. He was a Xylanthian of the old school, tall, arrogant, and convinced of his own divinity. He looked at the sensor display and scoffed. "They have gathered their fleet," Zale's adjutant reported, his voice filled with derision. "It is pathetic, Admiral. Thousands of small metallic boxes. They are literally strapped together with cables. They have no shields. Their weapons are physical projectiles. A Deathworlder's final tantrum," Zale said, waving a hand. "Move the Sun Crushers into position. We will not waste time with a conventional battle. Burn the system and be done with it." The Hegemony fleet moved forward, a wall of purple light and obsidian geometry. They passed the orbit of Saturn, their sensors focused on the tiny, primitive fleet waiting for them near the moons of Jupiter. But then the sensors began to scream. "Admiral! Something is wrong!" the adjutant cried out. "The primitive ships. They aren't attacking us. Then what are they doing? They are falling." Out of the shadow of Jupiter's moons, Sarah Vance's trap sprung. The human ships weren't ships at all. They were massive kinetic harpoons, each one weighted with a hyperdense alloy salvaged from the Aegis of Order. They didn't have engines. They had gravity slings. Using the massive pull of Jupiter, the humans had launched thousands of tons of dead weight directly into the path of the Hegemony fleet. At those speeds, and with that much mass, energy shields were useless. It was like trying to stop a bullet with a flashlight. The first wave of Hegemony cruisers didn't even have time to fire. They were simply erased. The kinetic slugs punched through their hulls, through their reactors, and out the other side, leaving nothing but expanding clouds of purple gas and debris. "Reverse engines!" Zale screamed, but it was too late. From the center of the debris field, the Starseeker emerged, flanked by a dozen other captured ships. But they weren't alone. Strapped to the hull of a massive blocky Earth freighter was the main cannon of the Aegis of Order, a weapon that required more power than the freighter could provide. "Sarah, the humans are signaling," Kai said, his voice filled with awe. They are offering their own power grids. They've laid a network of superconducting cables across the moon of Europa. They want us to plug in." Sarah watched as the human freighter docked with the Starseeker. She saw the faces of the human engineers through the viewports, men and women in bulky, patched-up spacesuits, giving her the thumbs up. "Plug in," Sarah commanded. The Starseeker shuddered as the power of 1,000 human-made fusion reactors flooded its systems. The main cannon began to glow with a terrifying white-hot intensity. "Admiral Zale," Sarah's voice broadcasted across the hegemony's fleet frequency. "Welcome to the Death World. We hope you enjoy the local hospitality." The cannon fired. A beam of pure, concentrated energy tore through the void, striking the light of reason squarely in its primary reactor. The flagship didn't just explode. It vanished in a silent, blinding flash of white light. The Purge fleet broke. The invincible armada of the hegemony, seeing their admiral vaporized by a primitive species, turned and fled toward the nearest jump point. But the humans weren't done. They chased them. The tiny, blocky ships, fueled by the rage of 10,000 years of quarantine, hounded the retreating aliens all the way to the edge of the system. On the bridge of the Starseeker, Sarah Vance slumped into the command chair. She was exhausted, her mind still buzzing with the remnants of the psychic link, but she was smiling. "We did it," Kai whispered, looking at the retreating dots of purple light. "No," Sarah said, looking at the thousands of human ships buzzing around them like a swarm of angry hornets. "We just started." She looked at Earth. It was no longer a specimen in a jar. It was a beacon. And as the first contact protocol officially ended, Sarah Vance knew that the garden was never going to be the same. The heirs of the Death World had reached the stars. And they brought the thunder with them. "Jax," Sarah said, her voice regaining its strength. "Tell the fleet to regroup. We have 12 worlds to visit. And I think they're all waiting for someone to break the glass." The revolution was no longer a secret. It was a war. And Earth was leading the charge.